Hi everyone, and welcome to this Youth Affairs Council Victoria and Young Workers Centre webinar on COVID-19 and your rights at work. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the custodians on which we meet and host this webinar this evening, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the custodians from where you join us. We also acknowledge elders past, present, and particularly those emerging and young people in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. My name is Luke and I am from Youth Affairs Council Victoria. We are the peak body and leading advocate for young people aged 12 to 25 and youth workers in Victoria. Our vision is that the rights of young people in Victoria are respected and they are active, visible and valued in their communities. This is the first in a series of webinars and resources we're creating to support you now and over the next year as we collectively work through the pandemic. We've heard from hundreds of young people who've told us about their experiences of work, of unemployment and financial hardship because of COVID-19. I'm joined by Felicity from the Young Workers Centre to provide information about your work rights this evening, both during the pandemic and then also to answer your questions about your rights at work. We want to hear your questions this evening, so you can either use the chat box if you're joining us on Zoom, or you can comment directly on the video on Facebook Live. At YACVic, we have a commitment to accessibility. This webinar includes closed captions. If you need support to access this webinar or any of our future webinars or information, please let us know. So tonight I'm joined by Felicity, who is the Director of the Young Workers Centre, a one-stop shop for young workers who want to learn more about their rights at work or who need assistance in resolving workplace issues. Previously, Felicity was the Lead Campaign Organiser at Victorian Trades Hall Council, the peak body for unions in Victoria, where she led the team through countless election campaigns. Felicity will provide an overview of your work rights and will then answer your questions. So I'll hand over to Felicity. Thanks.
Hi everyone, and thanks for the intro, Luke, and thanks to YACVic for the invite this evening. We know that this is a super stressful time for so many young workers. COVID-19 is obviously impacting everyone's workplaces and the ability to earn a wage massively. And so like Luke said this evening, I'm going to answer some of the most commonly asked questions to help you navigate this confusing and stressful time. And before I do that, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all on this evening. I live down in the southeast of Melbourne, so I'm on Boonwurrung country, and I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So like Luke said, I'm Felicity from the Young Workers Centre, and I'm now 12 years into my working life. And my first job was at a supermarket where I worked every Thursday night and Sunday during the last 2 years of school. And then whilst I was at uni, I worked in a call centre and a bakery. And I was lucky enough in my summer holidays to go over to America, and I actually spent 2 summers working at a summer camp in America. And after I graduated, I graduated in the UK from university, and I found myself living in Melbourne. During my first 12 months living in Melbourne, I juggled a few different jobs, one at a jeweller's, one at an after-school care service, and in an MP's office, and I also was juggling a couple of internships at the same time. But I landed on my feet with a job at Victorian Trades Hall Council, which is where I've worked for the last 6 years. Victorian Trades Hall Council is a peak body for unions in Victoria, and that's where the Young Workers Centre is housed. So the Young Workers Centre is an initiative of the Victorian Union Movement, and we were set up and founded in 2016 because we know that so many young workers are unfortunately being ripped off and exploited at work. So we strive for a state in which young people are safe at work, do not suffer harassment or bullying, and are provided their legal entitlements. And to do that, we educate young people on their rights, safety and well-being at work. So just like what we're doing this evening, We also provide free legal advice to Victorians under the age of 30 to help them resolve workplace issues. And we train and organise and bring young people together to develop campaigns to improve their workplaces. So we know that things were already pretty tough for young workers prior to COVID-19, and this unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in. Young workers were already dealing with increased casualisation of the workforce, increasingly insecure work, and these things will make it harder for young people like yourselves to come together with your workmates and speak up for your rights at work. But hopefully some of the info I give you tonight will help you navigate this confusing and stressful time. I'll just preface it by saying that this is general advice. Zoom and Facebook Live is great, but obviously I'm not entirely sure who is listening in tonight until we get to the Q&A section. So this is general advice rather than legal advice. I am not a lawyer, but we do have a community legal centre, like the Young Workers Centre is a community legal centre. And we do have lawyers on hand if you have further questions that can't be answered tonight. The final slide will have our contact details on as well for you to reach out with any questions about your sort of specific situations and circumstances that you find yourselves in now. So everyone obviously is in different situations right now. I'm just going to start by saying if you are still at work, it's really important that your health and safety is not compromised right now. So your employer must be taking every step they reasonably can right now to control or eliminate risks to your health and safety at work. So right now they must be identifying risks that are posed to you at work. These are obviously, these differ depending on your workplace. If you're in retail or if you're in the health sector, you're coming into contact with members of the public, that would pose a different risk to, for instance, if you're in a call centre right now and you're sharing headsets and equipment. So the first step is for your workplaces to be identifying the risks. And then the next step is to take reasonable and practical steps to control those risks. So, your employer must be putting measures in place. They must be, maybe they should be providing hand sanitizer or gloves or spacing out desks if you can't work from home. Those are just a few things that employers can be doing to eliminate or control any risks that you face at work in terms of your health and safety right now. That plan that they come up with needs to be based on expert advice. So advice that is given by the Chief Health Officer or the Department of Health and Human Services. So yeah, that's got to be based on expert advice. You also have a right to be consulted throughout that process. And so do any health and safety representatives at your workplace and your union as well, if you're a member of your union. Communication is the key in all these situations that we find ourselves in right now, including health and safety and changes to workplaces and working hours and so on as well. So communication is key. They should be consulting with you, and if they haven't yet come up with a plan, it's really important that you are going to your employer, your boss right now, and telling them that you have rights and you have health and safety rights under the law, and that they need to be taking every step they can to protect you. And I know we've heard some stories of where employers have, trying to downplay the risks of COVID-19. And claim, it's just like the flu, it's no big deal, and it's only a big deal in Italy. Those sorts of places, like it's a real risk to your health and safety right now, and they need to be taking it seriously too. And so that's health and safety at work. Obviously, so many young workers now are experiencing changes to their work. These are the 5 most commonly asked questions that we are getting at the Young Workers Centre. Again, as general advice, some of this may vary if your employer opts into the JobKeeper program, but this is general advice around these 5 most commonly asked questions that we're getting. So one of the most common questions at the moment is, can my boss stand me down? We're getting that, especially obviously there's been a downturn in business, and we know that so many young workers work in retail, in hospitality, in entertainment, and those sorts of sectors which have had to close their doors in some instances, or being impacted by people staying at home and not going out shopping, for instance. So it is possible for an employer to stand you down if the work has stopped and the employer is not reasonably responsible for that happening. So it has to be no meaningful work, and for it to be having an economic impact. And it can't just be that there's less work for a particular person to do. In that instance, an employer should be attempting to find alternative work for you, in maybe another area of the business, if that's a possibility. This is the rationale that Qantas have used. You've probably seen in the media that they stood down 2/3 of their workforce and 20,000 workers, and that's because they said that obviously planes are not flying, the workers stopped, and it was not, they as an employer they were not reasonably responsible for the circumstances outside of their control. If you do think there's a chance of that happening at your workplace, now is the time to get together with your workmates and negotiate with your employer now. You might be able to negotiate to take accrued paid leave or reduce your hours, but again, only do that if there's a genuine reason for work to have reduced and a possible stand down. We don't want employers and bosses using this as an excuse to not give shifts out to their workers. This kind of leads us into the next two commonly asked questions, which is, can my boss force me to take annual leave, or can my boss reduce my hours? So annual leave is normally it's taken by agreement, and it's used for leisure purposes. That's the intention of annual leave. An employer, normally outside of these circumstances, and the only time they could really force you to take your annual leave is if you've got an excessive amount of annual leave accrued. Now, we know that so many young workers don't have an excessive amount of annual leave accrued. Often you've not been either in the workplace long enough to have accrued an excessive amount, which is probably 8 weeks plus, or unfortunately you might be a casualty, you might not even be accruing annual leave. Obviously, if you do have accrued annual leave and the options are either stand down without pay or to take your annual leave, that might be something you want to negotiate. If that's the one of the few options you have up your sleeve. Again, that's by consultation, it's by agreement, and the employer cannot unreasonably refuse your request for leave if that's something you want to negotiate with your boss. In terms of, can my boss reduce my hours, it's really important you look at your contract as a starting place, and so that'll state the minimum hours per week, and normally they cannot unilaterally alter that contract without you agreeing. So again, it's consultation is again really important here. It's about a two-way conversation happening, and it's really important, like I said, that dialogue happens. In terms of JobKeeper, opting into the JobKeeper wage subsidy, that can have some impacts here where the employer has more flexibility and options to alter your hours of work and your place of work. But on the whole, it's altering your hours of work or reducing your hours of work should be done in consultation with you, rather than a forced procedure. And moving on to a big one. So what rights do you have as a casual? like I said, we know that so many young workers are casuals. We know about 50% of young workers are casuals, so that's obviously huge. And unfortunately, this is a big downfall to the casualisation of the workforce, is that casuals are not entitled to any form of paid leave, like sick leave or annual leave. So that obviously leaves casual workers and young workers pretty vulnerable. Prior to this, but even more so now that we find ourselves in these uncharted territories. So again, it's really important that you speak to your boss, see if there's options available, see whether they can request, see if you can request that they extend maybe sick leave to their casuals, for instance. And if you find yourself falling ill or having to quarantine or self-isolate, it's like sit down with them as with your workmates. It's likely that if you're a casual in the workplace, there'll be lots of other casuals in the workplace. And it's really important, yeah, that you sit down with them and have a conversation with them about what options are available to you and your workmates. And then finally, on a slightly different tack is, can my boss increase my hours? So obviously lots of industries are reducing hours and standing people down, but there are some industries where work is increasing and workloads are increasing, particularly if you are in retail, health, and logistics or transport, those sorts of industries. And they, in terms of increasing hours, yes, they can if the request is reasonable. So some things to take into account are, coming back to what we were talking about at the start, which is health and safety. So if making you work an excessive number of hours is going to cause fatigue, for instance, then that's something to be taken into consideration when whether that request is reasonable. If you are working extra hours, obviously you must be paid for those extra hours. And again, you also should be taking into consideration family responsibilities and how that might impact your other responsibilities that you have in your life at the moment. And lots of, I guess on that note as well, if you are being asked to work more hours, like there are so many people out of work at the moment, and maybe it's worth suggesting to your employer that they might want to take on more members of staff, those who are out of work at the moment, to share that burden. So those are 5 most commonly asked questions, but happy to answer any of your questions through the comments and Q&A at the end. Now I'll move on to talking about Jobseeker and JobKeeper. So there's been lots of talk over the last couple of weeks about entitlements for workers, when they're finding it tough to put food on the table and a roof over their head because they're not getting as much income. And there's been lots of terms thrown around, so hopefully this is helpful in terms of clearing up what all of this means for you. So Jobseeker is formerly New Start, and that is for anyone who is unemployed and looking for work at the moment. So that is people who are queuing up for Centrelink at the moment. They're queuing up for the Jobseeker payments on the whole. So if you are eligible for the Jobseeker payments, and say you're eligible for the maximum amount, this is income tested, you'll receive approximately $1,100 per fortnight, and that does include a coronavirus supplement, which is $550 per fortnight. That coronavirus supplement won't be paid until late April, but that is Jobseeker, so formerly New Start. And youth allowance has also, and that coronavirus supplement has also been extended to recipients of youth allowance. And so that's worth noting as well, that those people who are already receiving youth allowance should get the coronavirus supplement too. So that's kind of programs which were already in place and have been extended. The amount's been increased as well of New Start or Jobseeker, whatever you want to call it. But JobKeeper is a whole new package. It's a wage subsidy, which the government announced probably 2 weeks ago now. It's all a bit of a blur, but this is a package intended to keep you employed and connected to your place of employment. So it means that your employer, if they opt into the JobKeeper scheme, will receive a flat rate of $1,500 for each eligible employee per fortnight. Then they pass that on to you through normal, processes and how you normally get paid. You might have reduced hours, or you might not be working at all. You can still receive this $1,500 per fortnight, and it means that, like I said, you're still connected to your employer. So hopefully, when we go back to normal, it means that you can then, for instance, start receiving shifts straight away. You don't need to start applying for jobs, and you're still technically on the books, so things can get moving again quicker. You don't need to, your employer doesn't need to go through a recruitment process or training you unless you need a refresher or any new training or any new processes that have come into place in the time that you've not been working or been on reduced hours. But it means that ultimately, you are still connected to your employer, and that's really important for post the situation that we find ourselves in right now. This is like a huge package, and the government wasn't even sort of considering this about 3 weeks ago. So it is a massive step in the right direction, but it isn't perfect, and there's definitely things that at the Young Workers Centre that we are still fighting for and trying to increase its eligibility so that more workers can receive the JobKeeper payment. And so at the moment, you must be full-time, part-time, a sole trader, or have been a casual employed on a regular and systematic basis for over 12 months. Now, the key date for that is the 1st of March. So if you were employed in any of those capacities on the 1st of March 2020, that is the day that this is all based on. And your place, your employer, the company, the organisation that you work for, must have also had a downturn in profit. So if you're working for a small place with a turnover of less than $1 billion per annum, that workplace would have had to have a downturn of about 30% or more to be eligible. If it was a larger place with a bigger turnover, they would have to have a downturn in profit of at least 50% to be eligible. So it depends on the size of the place you work in terms of whether your employer is eligible. But those are the things to take into consideration. Your employer has to opt in to JobKeeper. So if you think they might be eligible, if you think you might be eligible, I would definitely be encouraging them to opt into the scheme. And also, I've lost my train of thought. That was it. If you say since the 1st of March you were stood down in between the 1st of March and say this package being announced, you can reapproach your former employer and ask them to take you back on, as long as you were one of those eligible. It fell into the criteria of eligibility. And you can actually ask them to take you back on the books and opt into the scheme. So that's also an option if your circumstances have changed since the 1st of March and they made you redundant, for instance. That is something to take into consideration, that you can reapproach them and have that conversation with them, and hopefully they'll put you back on the books now that there is this amount of money that will essentially help them pay your wage. On to the next slide. Obviously, a lot of what I've talked about today involves having a conversation with your boss. I know that's difficult and pretty nerve-wracking, but navigating complex issues like this and speaking to your employer is a lot easier if you and your workmates stick together and with the backing of a union as well. So it's harder for an employer to ignore everybody than it is to ignore just one person who might approach them. So I definitely encourage you to bring your workmates together, have a discussion, and then speak to your employer together. It's far less daunting or far more useful way to approach these things. And like I said, having the backing of a union is really helpful in these circumstances, but so many other circumstances too. There is a union for everyone. You can head to australianunions.org.au to find out which union covers your industry. There are some unions at the moment who know that it's such a difficult time for workers right now and have waived a couple of months of membership fees. Those off the top of my head include Hospital Voice, which is a union for hospitality workers, and the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, which covers any workers in media, entertainment, arts, and then the National Tertiary Education Union as well, which covers higher education workers. They'll be able to support you and give you all the information and advice that you need in these circumstances too. Like I said, speak to your boss together, and you can also take a support person into any meetings that you might be having with your boss too. That could be a friend, could be a union delegate, an organizer, and you can, it's good to take someone in with you as a support person. After any meetings as well, you might be having a meeting, not necessarily face to face right now, it might be over the phone. Either way, I would definitely recommend that any conversations you have around your workplace rights, straight after that meeting, you send a follow-up email to your boss outlining the discussion that you've had. That way, it's all in writing, and it's a pretty true account of the conversation you've had, and it's really helpful if down the line you need to raise any issues of anything that pops up. On that same note, I would keep any documentation and any emails, Facebook messages, texts, that sort of thing, that sort of correspondence that you might have with your employer. If you think that things aren't quite right, if they seem unjust or unfair, all those documentations really help when trying to seek some sort of justice down the track too. Finally, that was a lot of me just talking at you there with a lot of information. So this is where you can find out more info. We've got our phone number there, our 1-800 number. That is any Victorian under the age of 30 who needs any legal assistance or got any queries about your workplace rights beyond tonight. Feel free to reach out to us there. If you go to our website as well, youngworkers.org.au, there is a COVID-19 kind of fact sheet page with a heap of frequently asked questions and responses on the website. And then also if you go to our Facebook page, Young Workers Centre, there are also various different videos that kind of cover the same topics as well. So I might hand back to you, Luke, and we'll see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Felicity, and thank you for such a good and comprehensive presentation. Amazing.
Sorry to bombard.
And I have definitely been using that Young Workers FAQ for all of the questions that we've been receiving, so I'd encourage everyone to go there. We have a few questions that have come in already. The first one is about young people who have heard about JobKeeper in the news and are thinking about trying to access it, but they haven't heard anything from their boss yet, or their boss hasn't been in contact. Should they reach out? Should they wait to hear something?
I think it's good to be on the front foot with this. So definitely, reach out to your boss and your employer and have a conversation with them about whether they are intending to opt into the scheme, and encourage them to. Most places are eligible to opt in as such, and see if if they're not sure, ultimately they'll get approved or not approved as an employer. So I would definitely be encouraging young workers to speak to their boss and encourage them to opt in. it will be backdated to the 30th of March, but it's really important that their employer is registering like their intent to claim and receiving all that information and starting the process so that they can get approved and so on.
Perfect, thank you. And we have lots of JobKeeper and Jobseeker questions actually. The next one comes from someone that joined us on Zoom. They asked, will anyone who loses their job now automatically get the Jobseeker payment, or what used to be called New Start, if they aren't eligible for JobKeeper because they've lost their job?
So if a worker loses their job right now, is made redundant, for instance, and they're not, either their employer or them as an employee is not eligible for JobKeeper, then I would definitely, the next thing is to apply for Jobseeker and go through the process on the Centrelink website. So Centrelink Jobseeker is done through the Centrelink website. JobKeeper is all managed through the ATO website, just to keep things confusing for everyone. But if you're not eligible for JobKeeper, definitely go through the process with Centrelink and see if you're eligible for Jobseeker.
And I should say we have a webinar next week with Social Security Rights Victoria on income support payments, so youth allowance, Jobseeker, JobKeeper, all of that.
Great, yeah, because obviously the eligibility for all those different payments is another, crazy sort of process to navigate and get your head around.
Very difficult. The next question, it's the last one about JobKeeper, but I'm going to throw it in. So this person's asked, say you're an eligible casual to receive the JobKeeper subsidy because your employer is shut down. Will you still be eligible for JobKeeper if you get another casual job, let's say in a supermarket?
That's a really good question. So yes, you can, if you get JobKeeper through the primary place of employment as of right now, you can go and get another job. So you can also earn as much as possible through that job. And this JobKeeper is not income tested. So yes, you can go and get a job elsewhere. Just make sure you don't resign from the job that you're getting JobKeeper through.
And off JobKeeper for a second.
Yeah.
We've heard from some young people who've sent in questions who have been pressured by their employer to work more shifts or longer shifts, particularly young people who work at supermarkets. Mm-hmm. If young people are being pressured, what can they do to sort of have a conversation with their boss or get help?
Yeah, so like I said, some industries are obviously experiencing massive increases in workload, and some young workers are being asked to work lots more hours, and that request has to be reasonable, and you need to take into consideration things like your health and safety, so fatigue, consider family responsibilities that you might have and how that might be impacted. Those are things to take into consideration when deciding whether it's reasonable. And in terms of having that conversation with your boss, again, I would recommend that you take a support person, you speak to your other workmates, see what they reckon, come together as a collective, because you have far more kind of power and influence when you stick together rather than dealing with these situations on your own. And yeah, I mean, like in retail, there's heaps of opportunities there for that employer to hire more people who are currently not getting shifts or not doing other sorts of work that they would normally be doing. So if it is difficult and that young worker decides that it's unreasonable to do those extended shifts or too many shifts, then those are all conversations that you can be having too.
Thank you. And we've been asked if someone has been told by their boss that they won't be paid their normal amount, do all of the normal workplace laws apply? Things like you have to be paid the minimum wage or you have to be paid a certain award rate?
Yeah, so as in their employer is trying to cut their pay per hour?
Yeah, pay them a little bit less because of everything that's happening.
Yeah, so award rates and minimum pay still exists. Don't let any boss tell you that they can get away with, paying you breadcrumbs. That's not a thing. If they're saying they can't, afford to continue paying you at the rate you have been paid at, it's probably more sensible to negotiate your shifts, and then because once they drop your rate of pay, that's going to be a fight going back to your normal rates pay. At what point do they turn around and say, all right, business has improved again, everything's back to normal? And that's really hard for you to suggest that that's the case and put the onus on them to put you back up to whatever you were paid at before. And so yeah, I would be very hesitant to accept a lower hourly rate of pay. Certainly shouldn't be below minimum wage. And if your employer and you as an employee are eligible for JobKeeper payment, then that could also bridge the gap between what they are saying they can afford and what they would normally pay you. And that wage subsidy package is there to help employers cover wages and pay wages. So they shouldn't be dropping your hourly rate of pay.
Perfect. I think the really important thing there is that no one should be accepting a lower pay at the moment. Definitely not young people that are being pressured. That's all the questions we've had for now. Do you maybe just want to provide the details for people that might be having problems that want to get in touch with the Young Workers Centre again?
Yeah. Let me share my screen again, see how we go. Is that back up?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we've got phone number, Twitter, Facebook, website, so many different ways to get in touch with us, and we'll be back in touch as soon as possible. On our website as well, there's a survey, a form, so if you've got particular workplace issues, you can also fill out the form and then we'll give you a call back too. Otherwise, you can call the 1-800 number. We are obviously all working from home, but it is redirected, and we've got access to all the voicemails as well. So we're all set up to make sure that no young worker is left behind.
Perfect. Thank you so much again. So that's all for this evening. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you have more questions, please send them through either on Facebook or if you're watching there, or by email to info@yacvic.org.au if you have general questions, or obviously the details that Felicity's provided about the Young Workers Centre. You can join us for our next webinar at the same time and place online next Thursday at 6 p.m. with Social Security Rights Victoria to learn more about income support payments, including Jobseeker, JobKeeper, Youth Allowance, what used to be called New Start, and obviously Rent Assist and everything else. You can find more information at youngworkers.org.au and www.yacvic.org.au. Thank you again and stay safe.